The fluorescent hum of the chaotic ER waiting room usually drowned out secrets, but Thomas could hear the silence between his wife and the lead surgeon louder than any siren. It was in the way her hand lingered on the doctor's sleeve a second too long, a touch too intimate for a professional consultation about her injured son. Beneath the sterile scent of antiseptic, the air was thick with a betrayal that had already cost an innocent boy his safety. If you want to uncover the darkness hiding behind these pristine medical coats, stay with me. The hydraulic lift hissed, lowering the 1967 Shelby Mustang until its tires kissed the concrete floor of the garage. Thomas wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, the thick smell of oil and gasoline acting as a familiar comfort against the biting Chicago winter howling outside the bay doors. It was nearly 8 in the evening. The silence in the shop was usually his sanctuary, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of his past deployments in Fallujah. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, predictive. He was just reaching for his thermos of lukewarm coffee when his phone buzzed against the metal workbench. The screen lit up, harsh and bright in the dim workshop. St. Jude Hospital ER. Thomas didn't hesitate. The rag dropped to the floor. His heart, trained to remain steady under fire, hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "This is Thomas Rourke," he answered, his voice a low gravel, stripping away any pleasantries. "Mr. Rourke, this is the charge nurse at St. Jude. Your son, Leo, has been admitted. There was an incident at the park. He's stable, but I'm 10 minutes out." Thomas hung up before she could finish. He didn't lock the shop. He didn't change out of his coveralls. He vaulted into his pickup truck, the engine roaring to life like a startled beast, and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching against the black ice covering the asphalt. The drive was a blur of red taillights and white fury. Leo was supposed to be with Lisa. It was her day off. She had promised to take him to the indoor playground, a rare moment of mother-son bonding that Thomas had encouraged, hoping to bridge the widening gap he felt growing in his own home. An incident. The word tasted like ash. When Thomas burst through the sliding doors of the emergency room, the sterile air hit him like a physical wall, chemical, cold, and indifferent. He ignored the receptionist, his eyes scanning the waiting area with the predatory focus of a man looking for a threat. He found Lisa near the nurse's station. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing that struck him. She was standing with her arms crossed, her posture rigid, wearing a trench coat that was far too elegant for a casual day at the playground with a 6-year-old. Her makeup was flawless. Her lips painted a deep crimson that looked violent under the fluorescent lights. "Lisa," Thomas barked, closing the distance. She jumped, her eyes darting to him. For a split second, Thomas saw something flash across her face. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sorrow. It was guilt. Pure, unadulterated panic. "Tom," she breathed, her voice tight. You got here fast. Where is he?" Thomas demanded, towering over her. "What happened?" "He fell," Lisa said quickly, her fingers nervously twisting the belt of her coat. "We were at the park and he climbed too high on the jungle gym. I told him to get down, but he slipped. This is his leg, Tom. They think it's a fracture." "You told him to get down?" Thomas repeated, his eyes narrowing. He looked at her shoes, high-heeled leather boots. "Not exactly park attire." "You were watching him?" "Of course I was watching him," she snapped, defensive now, her voice rising an octave. "Why are you looking at me like that? It was an accident. Children fall, Tom. Don't bring your interrogation tactics in here." Before Thomas could respond, the double doors to the trauma unit swung open. A man stepped out, peeling off latex gloves with a practiced, arrogant flair. He was tall, with perfectly coiffed hair and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled for a magazine cover. Dr. Adrian Hale. Thomas knew him by reputation. St. Jude's golden boy. "Family of Leo Rourke?" Dr. Hale asked, his voice smooth, commanding the room. "I'm his father," Thomas said, stepping between Lisa and the doctor. Dr. Hale's gaze didn't land on Thomas immediately. Instead, it flickered to Lisa. It was brief, lasting less than a second, but Thomas saw it. It was a look of familiarity, a look of shared secrets, a look that said, "I've got this handled." "Mr. Rourke," Hale said, finally turning his eyes to Thomas, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A nasty break on the tibia. But don't worry. I was just finishing my shift, but I decided to take the case personally. Your wife is a valued member of our staff, after all. We take care of our own." Thomas looked from the pristine doctor to his flustered wife. He smelled it then. A faint trace of expensive men's cologne hanging in the air around Lisa, mixing with her own perfume. It was the same scent radiating off Dr. Hale. The monitor down the hall beeped rhythmically, but the world around Thomas went silent. The war wasn't in the desert anymore. It was right here in this hallway. "Can I see my son?" Thomas asked, his voice dangerously calm. Briefly, Hale nodded, checking his gold watch. "Then we need to prep him. I want to operate within the hour." Thomas nodded slowly. He didn't trust the smile on the doctor's face. He didn't trust the trembling of his wife's hands. And he certainly didn't trust the coincidence of the golden boy surgeon staying late for a simple fracture. "Lead the way," Thomas said. As he followed them down the corridor, Thomas let his hands curl into fists inside his pockets. He was a man who fixed broken things for a living, but looking at the backs of his wife and the doctor, he had a sinking feeling that some things were beyond repair. They had to be destroyed. Leo looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, his face pale and streaked with dried tears. The sedative had just begun to take hold, glazing his eyes over, but when he saw Thomas, a weak whimper escaped his lips. "Daddy," Leo croaked. "I'm here, bud. I'm right here." Thomas ignored the grease on his coveralls and gripped Leo's small, uninjured hand. His own hand was rough, calloused, and stained with engine oil, a stark contrast to the pristine, sterile whiteness of the room. He felt a pang of shame for not having scrubbed up, for bringing the grime of his world into this sanctuary of healing. Dr. Adrian Hale stood at the foot of the bed, holding a digital tablet like a shield. He didn't look at Leo. He looked at the X-ray images on the screen with a detached, almost bored expression. "Spiral fracture of the tibia," Hale announced, his voice smooth and devoid of empathy. "Complex, not something a cast will fix. We need to go in, set it with pins, maybe a plate. Standard procedure for me, but high risk if left to anyone less experienced." Thomas straightened up, his protective instincts flaring. "Pins? He's 6 years old. Is surgery the only option? I've read about non-invasive setting for." Hale let out a short, patronizing chuckle. He finally looked at Thomas, his blue eyes drifting disdainfully from Thomas's work boots up to the oil smudge on his cheek. "Mr. Rourke," Hale interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "I assume you're very good at whatever it is you do with cars. Changing oil? Replacing mufflers?" "I restore vintage engines," Thomas said, his voice low. "Right. Engines," Hale smiled tight. "Well, the human body isn't a carburetor. You can't just wrench it back into place. Unless you have a medical degree hiding in those coveralls, I suggest you let me do my job. Or would you prefer to take him home and fix him with duct tape?" The room went dead silent. Thomas felt the heat rise up the back of his neck. It wasn't just the insult. It was the way Lisa reacted. She didn't defend him. She didn't look angry. She looked embarrassed. "Tom, please," Lisa whispered, stepping closer to Hale, effectively physically aligning herself with the doctor against her husband. "Adrian, Dr. Hale is the best. He knows what he's doing. Don't make this difficult." Thomas watched them. He saw the way Lisa's shoulder brushed against Hale's arm as she leaned in to look at the tablet. It was a subtle movement, natural to the untrained eye, but Thomas had spent years in reconnaissance. He knew the difference between accidental contact and gravitational pull. They stood too close. Their body language mirrored each other. It was a closed circuit, and Thomas was the short fuse waiting to blow. "I just want to know the timeline," Thomas said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "How long is the surgery? Who is the anesthesiologist?" "I have my own team." Hale waved a hand dismissively. "We need to move now to avoid nerve damage. I have a conference to attend later tonight, so I'm squeezing this trauma case in as a favor to Lisa." Favor to Lisa. The words hung in the air, heavy with double meaning. Hale's eyes locked onto Lisa's for a fraction of a second too long. A flicker of a smile played on the doctor's lips, arrogant, possessive. It was the look of a man who owned the room and everything in it. "Fine," Thomas said, realizing he had no leverage here. Leo needed help, and this man, despite his arrogance, held the scalpel. "Take care of my son." "I always deliver perfection," Hale said. He turned to the orderlies. "Let's move." As they unlocked the wheels of the bed, Lisa placed a hand on Hale's forearm. "Thank you, doctor." Her fingers lingered. Just a moment. A gentle squeeze on the fabric of his white coat. Hale didn't pull away. He leaned into it slightly before turning to follow the bed out of the room. Thomas stood alone in the empty trauma bay. The silence returned, buzzing with the electric hum of machinery. He looked down at his hands, dirty, scarred, capable of building and fixing beautiful machines. Then he looked at the door where his wife and the surgeon had disappeared together. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It wasn't just fear for Leo anymore. It was the distinct, gut-wrenching realization that the enemy wasn't outside the gates. The enemy was already inside the wire, wearing a white coat and smiling at his wife. The surgery was over in 45 minutes. To Thomas, it felt suspiciously efficient. He had expected a grueling wait, hours of pacing the linoleum floor, but Dr. Hale emerged from the operating theater looking as fresh as if he had just stepped out of a spa. There was no sweat on his brow, no fatigue in his posture. "Textbook," Hale declared, stripping off his surgical cap as he walked toward Thomas in the waiting area. "Pins are in. The alignment is perfect. He'll be groggy, but he's a tough kid." "That was fast," Thomas said, standing up. He tried to read the doctor's face, searching for any sign of complication masked by arrogance. "I don't waste time, Mr. Rourke. Efficiency is the hallmark of mastery," Hale replied, checking his phone. A notification lit up the screen, and a subtle smirk played on his lips. "I've left orders for post-op care. I have to run, urgent engagement. My residents will handle the rounds." Without waiting for a thank you, Hale turned on his heel, his white coat billowing slightly as he strode toward the elevators, not looking back. Thomas sat by Leo's bedside as the night deepened. The hospital settled into a low-frequency hum of ventilation systems and distant beeping monitors. Leo was drifting in and out of consciousness, his small face pinched in discomfort. Around 2 a.m., the whimpering started. It began as a low moan and quickly escalated into sharp, gasping cries. "Daddy, it hurts," Leo sobbed, his eyes squeezed shut. "My leg is burning." Thomas touched his son's forehead. It was hot, too hot. He checked the bag. The drip seemed slow, almost stopped. "It's okay, buddy. I'll get the nurse," Thomas whispered, his heart rate spiking. He pressed the call button attached to the bed rail. A red light flickered on above the door. Thomas waited. He smoothed Leo's hair, murmuring reassurances, watching the seconds tick by on the wall clock. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Leo's cries were getting louder, echoing in the small, semi-private room. "Where are they?" Thomas growled. He pressed the button again, harder this time, mashing it down. Still no one came. The station down the hall was silent. Panic began to mix with rage. Thomas couldn't sit there and watch his son suffer. "I'll be right back, Leo. Just 1 second." Thomas stepped out into the corridor. The hallway was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights dimmed for the night shift. The nurse's station was empty, a half-eaten sandwich and a stack of charts left unattended on the counter. It was a ghost town. "Hello?" Thomas called out. "My son needs help." Silence answered him. He walked further down the hall, his heavy boots making no sound on the floor, a habit from his days in the Corps. He turned the corner toward the administrative wing, looking for anyone in scrubs. That was when he heard a door click open. It was the door to the on-call room, the private lounge reserved for attending physicians to rest during long shifts. Light spilled out from the room into the dark hallway, cutting a sharp yellow rectangle across the floor. Thomas froze in the shadows, instinctively pressing his back against the wall. Lisa stepped out. She wasn't wearing her stethoscope. Her nursing scrubs, usually neat, were slightly disheveled. The V-neck of her top was pulled askew, revealing a patch of flushed skin on her chest. She was smoothing her hair down with both hands, her face carrying a high, rosy color that had nothing to do with the exertion of work and everything to do with intimacy. She didn't see Thomas at first. She turned back toward the open door, whispering something into the room, a soft, breathy giggle escaping her lips. "Go." A deep voice answered from inside. It was unmistakable. Adrian Hale, the man who had supposedly left hours ago for an urgent engagement. Thomas felt the air leave his lungs. The pieces clicked together with the violence of a slide racking on a pistol. The rush surgery, the disappearance of the staff, the unmonitored pain of his son. Lisa turned, closing the door softly. She began to button the top of her scrubs, adjusting her demeanor, preparing to return to the role of the worried mother and dedicated nurse. Then she looked up and saw him. Thomas stood 10 feet away, motionless in the shadows. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were burning. He watched her freeze, her hand halting on the final button. He saw the color drain from her face, replaced by the gray pallor of a deer caught in the headlights. Behind him, down the hall, Leo screamed in pain again. The sound tore through the silence, raw and accusing. Lisa flinched, but Thomas didn't move. He just stared at her, smelling the betrayal in the air, realizing that while his son was burning with fever, his wife had been burning with something else entirely, just a few doors down. The morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting harsh, striped shadows across Leo's bed. But the light brought no warmth. It only illuminated the horror that had developed overnight. Thomas hadn't slept. He had spent the remaining hours of the night in a chair, watching Lisa pretend to check charts, watching the door where Hale had disappeared. But when the shift changed and a young resident doctor came in to check Leo's vitals, the pretense shattered. The resident pulled back the sheet covering Leo's leg and gasped. "Oh God," the young man whispered. Thomas was on his feet instantly. He looked down at his son's leg. Below the knee, the skin wasn't the pale pink of recovery. It was swollen, shiny, and mottled with angry patches of purple and gray. The toes were cold to the touch. "What is that?" Thomas demanded, his voice cracking. "What's wrong with his leg?" "Circulation is compromised," the resident stammered, hitting the emergency call button. "It looks like compartment syndrome. The pressure. The cast might be too tight or a vessel was nicked. We need Dr. Hale immediately." Chaos erupted. Nurses rushed in. But it wasn't the coordinated dance of saving a life. It felt like damage control. Dr. Hale arrived 10 minutes later. He stormed into the room, not with the urgency of a savior, but with the annoyance of a man inconvenienced. He barely looked at the terrified resident before shoving past Thomas to inspect the leg. Hale's face remained impassive, but Thomas saw a tiny muscle in his jaw twitch, a micro-expression of recognition. He messed up. "It's an aggressive inflammatory response," Hale announced loudly, addressing the room rather than the parents. "The boy's vascular system is reacting poorly to the trauma. It's a physiological anomaly. Unfortunate, but not unprecedented." "Anomaly?" Thomas stepped forward, blocking Hale's path. You said the surgery was perfect. You said it was textbook. Why is my son's leg turning black? Mr. Rourke, lower your voice. Hale snapped, his blue eyes icy. Post-operative complications happen. Biology is unpredictable. We need to go back into the OR to relieve the pressure. If we don't, he could lose the foot. Lose the foot. The world tilted on its axis. Thomas lunged, grabbing the lapels of Hale's white coat. You were busy perfecting it last night while you were... Thomas, stop. It wasn't the security guards who pulled him back. It was Lisa. She shoved Thomas hard, her hands pressing against his chest, driving him back against the wall. Her eyes were wide, pleading. But she wasn't pleading for Leo. Don't do this here, she hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. Everyone is watching. You're gonna get thrown out. Did you hear him? Thomas pointed a shaking finger at Hale, who was straightening his coat with indignant precision. He almost killed our son's leg because he was rushing. Because he was with you. Thomas, shut up. Lisa's face twisted into something ugly. It's not Adrian's fault. Leo has always healed slowly. You know that. Don't ruin Dr. Hale's reputation over a bad reaction. We need him to fix this. If you make a scene, they'll transfer us to some resident, and then Leo really will be in trouble. Thomas looked at his wife. Really looked at her. He saw the desperation in her eyes. She wasn't a mother protecting her cub. She was a woman protecting her lover. She was willing to gaslight her own husband, willing to blame her son's slow healing, just to shield the man who had nearly crippled him. The realization hit Thomas harder than any IED explosion he had survived in the desert. The marriage didn't die in a shouting match. It died right there, in the silence that followed her defense of the indefensible. Thomas slowly lowered his hands. His breathing evened out. The chaotic heat of his rage cooled into something solid, heavy, and incredibly dangerous. He reverted to his training. When the enemy is superior in number and position, you don't charge. You retreat, you observe, and you wait for the kill shot. Fine, Thomas said. His voice was devoid of emotion. Do what you have to do. Lisa let out a breath of relief, mistaking his surrender for submission. She turned back to Hale, offering him an apologetic, intimate look. I'm so sorry, doctor. Please, save his leg. I'll do my best, Hale said stiffly, regaining his composure. Prep the OR. As they wheeled Leo out again, Thomas didn't follow immediately. He stood still in the empty room, the smell of antiseptic burning his nostrils. He wasn't going to yell anymore. He wasn't going to fight them in the hallway. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the voice recorder app. It had been running since he stepped into the room. He stopped the recording and saved the file. Evidence_01. Then, he walked out of the room, his boots silent on the floor, his eyes dry and focused. He wasn't a husband or a father in crisis anymore. He was a Marine on a mission. And the mission was simple, total destruction. The transfer to Northwestern Memorial Hospital took 3 hours of bureaucratic warfare. Lisa had screamed, cried, and threatened, but Thomas remained a wall of granite. He signed the discharge papers against medical advice from St. Jude, loaded his pale, groggy son into a private ambulance, and didn't exhale until a new team of trauma surgeons, strangers with no connection to Adrian Hale, took over Leo's care. Once Leo was stabilized and sleeping in a room that smelled of clean linen rather than deceit, Thomas kissed his son's forehead and left. He had a war to fight, and the battlefield was back at St. Jude. Thomas drove his truck back to the scene of the crime. He didn't park in the visitor lot. Instead, he parked 2 blocks away, in the shadow of a derelict warehouse, and walked. The bitter Chicago wind whipped against his face, sharpening his senses. He wasn't Thomas the husband anymore. He was Sergeant Rourke, reconnaissance. He needed access, and he knew exactly how to get it. Submission. He found Lisa in the employee parking structure. She was sitting in her sedan, her head resting on the steering wheel, looking exhausted. When Thomas tapped on the glass, she jumped. "Tom?" She rolled down the window, her eyes wary. "I'm sorry," Thomas said. The words tasted like bile, but he delivered them with the practiced humility of a beaten man. I was out of line. I was scared for Leo. I didn't mean to disrespect Dr. Hale." Lisa softened immediately. The tension left her shoulders. She saw what she wanted to see. A blue-collar husband realizing he was out of his depth. "Oh, Tom, I know. It's been a nightmare. I'm just glad you calmed down. I want to apologize to him personally," Thomas said, looking at his boots. "I don't want any bad blood. Can I go up?" "He's in his office." "Fourth floor," Lisa said, a hint of smugness returning to her voice. "Go make peace. I need a minute here." "Okay." Thomas leaned in, ostensibly to kiss her cheek. As he did, his hand moved with the swift, fluid precision of a magician. He slid a magnetic GPS and audio tracker, size of a matchbox, under the driver's seat. It clicked silently onto the metal rail. "I'll see you at home." Walking into the hospital, Thomas played the part perfectly. Shoulders slumped, hat in hand. He knocked on the mahogany door of Dr. Adrian Hale's office. "Come in," Hale's voice boomed. The office was a shrine to ego. Framed degrees, awards, and a view of the skyline. Hale sat behind a massive glass desk, looking at Thomas with amused contempt. "Mr. Rourke, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I came to apologize, Doctor," Thomas said, stepping forward but keeping his distance. "I acted emotionally. You were doing your job. I'm just a mechanic. I don't understand these things." Hale sat back, clasping his hands behind his head. The apology fed his narcissism like gasoline on a fire. "Apology accepted, Thomas. Emotions run high in the uneducated when they face complex science. I forgive you." "Thank you, sir." Thomas reached into his jacket pocket. I wrote a note. For the file." He fumbled with a pen, dropping it deliberately. It rolled under the front of Hale's desk. "Clumsy," Hale muttered, not moving to help. Thomas dropped to one knee. Sorry. Under the desk, hidden from Hale's line of sight by the modesty panel, Thomas retrieved the pen. But in the same motion, he pressed a second recording device, a high-fidelity bug he used for diagnosing engine knocks, onto the underside of the metal desk frame. "Got it," Thomas grunted, standing up. He placed the pen on the desk. "I won't take up more of your time. See that you don't," Hale said, already turning back to his computer. Thomas walked out. He didn't look back. He walked straight to his truck, drove to his workshop, and locked the doors. For the next 3 nights, Thomas lived in the garage. He set up a laptop on his workbench, surrounded by engine parts. He put on his headphones and waited. The audio from the office bug was crystal clear. Click, rustling papers. Did the husband leave? That was Lisa's voice. Yes, Hale laughed. Pathetic. He practically begged for forgiveness. The man is a grease monkey. He has no idea what happened in that or... What about the logs, Adrian? Lisa sounded anxious. The timestamp on the anesthesia. If anyone checks. Relax, babe. Hale's voice was smooth, dismissive. I'm altering the digital record now. We'll flag the complication as a latent genetic vascular defect. No one questions me, and certainly no one will believe the mechanic over the chief of surgery. I felt bad when I saw Leo's leg, Lisa whispered. Don't, Hale snapped. We had a good time, didn't we? The boy will limp for a while, but he'll live. Focus on us. Focus on the gala next week. You're going to look stunning by my side. Thomas took off the headphones. The silence in the garage was deafening. He stared at the waveforms on the screen, the visual representation of his son's pain and his wife's betrayal. He didn't smash the computer. He didn't throw a wrench. He simply saved the file, backed it up to 3 different cloud servers, and leaned back in his chair. The fire in his gut had turned into ice. They thought he was a stupid mechanic. They had no idea they had just handed him the blueprints to their own demolition. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in Thomas's workshop. Outside, the Chicago wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the corrugated metal doors. But inside, the air was still, deadly still. Thomas sat with the patience of a sniper waiting for a target to break cover. On his screen, 2 windows were open. The live audio feed from Adrian Hale's office and a draft email addressed to A. Hale at Stud. Med. He didn't need a gun to destroy Adrian Hale. He just needed to introduce a little chaos into the doctor's perfectly curated life. Thomas attached a small file to the email. It was a 10-second audio clip, just the part where Hale laughed about the grease monkey husband. The subject line was simple. I know what you did to Leo Rourke. He hit send. Then he put on his headphones and waited. Across town, in a high-rise condo overlooking the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan, Dr. Adrian Hale was rehearsing his speech for the upcoming medical ethics gala. He was adjusting his silk tie in the mirror, practicing his most benevolent smile, when his phone chimed on the marble countertop. Thomas heard the chime through the bug he had planted in the office, which Hale had synced to his mobile. He heard the rustle of fabric as Hale picked up the phone. Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. What the hell? Hale whispered. The sound of a glass shattering followed. Hale had dropped his whiskey tumbler. Seconds later, Thomas's other monitor lit up. A frantic phone call was being made from Hale's number. The recipient. Lisa. Thomas leaned in, his eyes cold and focused. Pick up. Pick up. Damn it. Hale hissed. Adrian? Lisa's voice came through, trembling. I'm at home. Thomas is in the garage. What's wrong? Check your secure email. Now, Hale ordered, his voice stripping away all the polished charm, leaving only raw panic. Someone recorded us. Someone knows about the timeline edits. What? Lisa sounded like she was hyperventilating. Who? Was it the resident? That nurse? I don't know. Hale shouted. Just listen to me. Did you delete the original logs from the server like I told you? I tried, Lisa stammered. But the system creates a shadow backup. I need your admin code to wipe it completely. Text it to me, Hale demanded. No, don't text. It leaves a trail. Meet me tomorrow morning at the coffee shop on 4th. We need to figure out who this is and pay them off before the gala. If this gets out before the board votes on the chief position, I'm dead. We're both dead. Adrian, I'm scared. Lisa whimpered. Maybe we should just confess. Maybe if we tell the truth. There is no truth. Hale roared. There is only my career and your job. Do not crack on me, Lisa. Do not let that loser husband of yours see you sweating. We fix this. We always fix this. The call ended. Thomas sat back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. He didn't need to meet them at the coffee shop. He didn't need to follow them anymore. They had just given him everything he needed. They had confirmed the cover-up, the existence of shadow backups, and the motive. On his screen, Thomas opened a video editing software. He imported the security footage he had pulled from the hospital servers earlier that week, the audio recordings of their illicit affair, and the fresh confession he had just captured. The medical ethics gala was in 2 days. It was a black tie event, the highlight of the social season, attended by the city's wealthy donors, the hospital board, and the press. Adrian Hale was the keynote speaker. He was supposed to give a presentation on integrity in modern medicine. Thomas dragged a file named the_truth_final_cut MP4 into a folder. He cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He wouldn't be attending the gala in a tuxedo. He would be in the server room, ensuring that Dr. Hale gave the performance of a lifetime. He looked at a photo of Leo taped to the edge of his monitor. The boy was smiling, holding a wrench, completely trusting his father to fix anything. I've got this, buddy, Thomas whispered to the empty room. Daddy's going to fix it all. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, shimmering under the light of massive crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of expensive champagne and ambition. At the center of it all stood Dr. Adrian Hale, illuminated by a single spotlight, looking every inch the savior of modern medicine. Lisa sat at a VIP table near the front, clapping politely. She wore a silver silk dress that clung to her figure, but her face was pale beneath the heavy makeup. She kept checking her phone, her eyes darting toward the exits, still haunted by the anonymous email from 2 days ago. But Adrian had assured her it was handled. He was untouchable. Integrity. Adrian's voice boomed through the high-fidelity speakers, smooth and hypnotic. It is the bedrock of our profession. Without transparency, without the courage to admit our limits, we are nothing more than technicians of the flesh. The audience nodded in approval. He clicked the remote to advance to his next slide, expecting a graph on surgical outcomes. Instead, the massive screen behind him flickered static. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Adrian frowned, tapping the remote again. Apologies, technical difficulties, he joked lightly. Then the screen cleared. It wasn't a graph. It was grainy black and white footage from a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read, St. Jude Hospital, on-call room corridor, 2:15 a.m. The room went dead silent. On the screen, 2 figures spilled out of a room. Everyone recognized the tall, broad-shouldered man and the slender nurse. They were disheveled, laughing. Adrian on the screen grabbed Lisa's waist, pulling her in for a kiss, while down the hall, the red light of a patient call button, Leo's room, flashed frantically, ignored. Turn it off, Adrian shouted, his composure cracking. He waved frantically at the sound booth. Cut the feed, but the video didn't stop. Cut to a black screen, and audio began to play. It was crystal clear, amplified to concert-level volume. The man is a grease monkey. He has no idea what happened in that, or... Adrian's voice, dripping with arrogance, echoed off the gilded walls. Then, Lisa's voice, trembling and distinct. What about the logs, Adrian? The timestamp on the anesthesia. I'm altering the digital record now. No one will believe the mechanic over the chief of surgery. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the ballroom. It wasn't just an affair. It was a confession of malpractice and a criminal cover-up. The donors, the hospital board members, the press, they all stared at the stage in horror. Lisa stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She looked like she was going to be sick. She turned around, looking for an escape, and that was when she saw him. Thomas was standing at the very back of the ballroom, leaning against the heavy oak doors. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a clean, dark button-down shirt and his work boots. He stood with his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of calm. He caught Lisa's eye. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked at her with a terrifying hollowness, like looking into an empty grave. This is a fabrication. Adrian screamed into the microphone, sweat pouring down his face, stripping away the golden boy facade to reveal the desperate coward beneath. Someone hacked the system. This is deepfake technology. But nobody was listening. The side doors burst open. Uniformed officers, accompanied by a woman in a suit wearing the badge of the state medical board, marched down the center aisle. The sound of their heavy footsteps cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Dr. Adrian Hale, the lead officer, announced, his voice carrying without a microphone. Step away from the podium. You are under arrest for medical fraud, falsification of records, and criminal negligence. Adrian froze. The remote slipped from his hand, clattering onto the stage. He looked at the officers, then at the board members who were now turning their backs on him, and finally, his eyes found Thomas at the back of the room. For the first time, the surgeon looked small. Lisa covered her mouth, a sob escaping as 2 officers moved toward her table as well. Ms. Rourke, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding the alteration of medical files. Thomas pushed off the doorframe. He didn't stay to watch them be handcuffed. He didn't need to see the cuffs click. He had seen the truth revealed, and that was enough. He turned his back on the glittering ruin of his wife's fantasy life and walked out into the cold Chicago night. The air tasted clean for the first time in weeks. 3 months later, the Chicago winter finally broke. The gray slush on the streets melted away, revealing the tentative green of early spring. But the thaw came too late for Adrian Hale. The sentencing hearing was brief and unglamorous. There were no cameras allowed inside, no fanfare, just the sharp crack of a gavel that signaled the end of a dynasty. Adrian, stripped of his bespoke suits and forced into an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, looked less like a god and more like what he truly was. A man who believed the rules didn't apply to him until they crushed him. He received 5 years for criminal negligence and fraud. His medical license revoked permanently. He didn't look at the gallery as he was led away. He knew there was no one there for him. Outside the courthouse, the wind was brisk but carried the scent of wet earth and new life. Thomas stood on the steps, adjusting his sunglasses. He held a manila envelope in his hand, the final decree of divorce and full custody of Leo. Thomas. He didn't need to turn to know it was Lisa. Her voice had lost its confident lilt. It was thin, frayed at the edges. She stood near the bottom of the steps. The transformation was stark. Gone were the designer coats and the professional polish. She wore jeans and a simple jacket that looked like it had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked ordinary. Tragically ordinary. I didn't think you'd stop, she said, wrapping her arms around herself as if cold. I'm just leaving, Lisa, Thomas said, his voice level. He felt no anger. The rage that had fueled him for weeks had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, empty space where his love for her used to be. I lost my job at St. Jude, she said, her voice trembling. And the agency. No one will hire a nurse with a record of falsifying charts. I'm staying at my sister's on the couch. Thomas nodded slowly. Actions have consequences. I miss him, Tom. She choked out, tears finally spilling over. I miss Leo. And I miss us. I know I messed up. I got caught up in the fantasy, in the status. But Adrian manipulated me. He made me feel special when I felt invisible. Can't we just try? For Leo? Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he was looking at a stranger. The woman who had sneaked out of a room while their son screamed in pain wasn't a victim. She was a volunteer. You didn't feel invisible, Lisa, Thomas said softly. You felt bored. There's a difference. He walked down the steps, closing the distance between them, but not to embrace her. He handed her the envelope. Leo is doing physical therapy 3 times a week. He asks about you less and less, Thomas said, delivering the truth with the precision of a scalpel. You have supervised visitation rights starting in 6 months, pending a psychological evaluation. Until then, stay away from us. Tom, please. She reached for his sleeve. He stepped back, out of her reach. You wanted a doctor, Lisa. You wanted someone who could fix things. Well, I fixed it. I cut out the rot. He walked past her, toward his truck where Leo was waiting. He didn't look back to see her collapse onto the concrete steps, sobbing into her hands. The drive to the park was quiet, comfortable. Leo sat in the passenger seat, his legs still in a walking boot, but the heavy cast was gone. Dad? Leo asked, looking out the window at the passing city. Yeah, bud? Is Mom coming? No, Leo. Not today. Just us men. Leo didn't look sad. He just nodded, accepting the new reality with the resilience of childhood. Okay, can we get ice cream after? You bet. They pulled up to the lakefront. The water was a brilliant, choppy blue. Thomas helped Leo out of the truck, handing him his crutches. But Leo shook his head. I want to try walking, the boy said, determination setting his jaw, a look he had inherited entirely from his father. "Okay." Slow and steady, Thomas said, hovering close, his hands ready to catch him. Leo took a step, then another. He limped, wincing slightly, but he stayed upright. He walked 10 feet, then 20, moving away from the truck, away from the hospital memories, away from the broken family. Thomas stood back, watching his son move under the spring sun. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with fresh air. He was a mechanic. His job was to take things that were broken, battered, and given up on and make them run again. He watched Leo turn back and smile, a genuine, bright smile that reached his eyes. "I'm doing it, Dad. Look at me." Thomas smiled back, a genuine smile of his own. The engine of their lives was humming again. Rougher, maybe. Scratched up, definitely. But it was running strong. "I see you, son," Thomas called out. "Keep going."